June 15th meeting of the Falmouth Conservation Commission and the Falmouth Planning Board. Tonight's conversation is going to be about coastal resiliency. Before we get started though, anyone with cell phones or other electronic devices, if you could please silence them, it'd be greatly appreciated. Okay, Brian, if you could lead us off. And
thank you, Mr. Chairman. For your record, my name is Brian Curry. I'm the town planner. So my tenure started here in 1989, and I don't quite recall these two boards ever meeting in joint session. Really? So congratulations to everyone here tonight.
We have at least
I think
once.
we have at least once. Maybe you weren't here.
I can't remember. I'll say, well, once in 27 years, I think now it's twice. So congratulations for that. Yes, the discussion is on, and you should have in your packages and your handouts, the coastal resiliency element. It was voted at the November 2014 town meeting. They vote the goals and the policies. But then there's also actions that the planning board and the local comprehensive plan committee contemplate for both themselves and others. And that'll be the focus of your discussions here tonight. It should be a fun night. We're not in regulatory world tonight, we're in planning world, so it should be a lot of fun. The board also wants to talk to the commission with regards to what other towns might be doing or have done and what we might be doing. And so in your package, you'll also see something from the town of Chatham in their conservancy districts. They've had conservancy districts for about 20 years. And at their last town meeting in April, they did make some changes, but we thought it would be best that you simply have what they've been working with for 20 years as a template. So that in a nutshell is what the board brings here tonight. And I know you want to also discuss your Conservation Commission initiatives with wetlands restorations and other sort of topics along those lines. I'm here as a resource for you, and enjoy your evening.
thanks, Brian. Mr. Fox, the first two items look like they're the planning board.
Yes.
So turn it
Well-
over to you, sir.
Well, so we hope you're familiar with the goals and policies, but tonight we're talking about some of the action items. And this is something that we do on the local comprehensive plan level. We develop these in speaking with different groups, and actually when we put this together, we met with Betsy and Jennifer to talk about some of the things we could do, and so they had some input to it. The first one is to create, and this is something, create comprehensive wetland restoration plan and begin the reconstruction of the most vulnerable areas. And the short term is to begin the restoration within the next 2 years. We came up with this plan 2 years ago. We haven't started anything yet. And the responsibilities, obviously we get, you might be surprised, we get to pick the assignments was your committee, town meeting, and DPW. So we are happy to see that you have an initiative about this on your own planning side, so at least we're thinking in the same way. It's not what I'm reading here. So it's coming together slowly, and as Brian points out, these things take a long time. They don't happen overnight. It's just something to work on. So why don't we talk about that for a little bit? What some of the areas that you would think you'd like to do, where the restoration could, what the plans are, what your plans are for that area, any of those areas?
You want me to do it right now, or
Well,
can
can
we
I-
do it when
can
we
I
get to
jump
our
in first?
section?
Well, it's an open discussion, and we're just talking friendly. I don't want to, I thought we'd just go down the article and,
Well, just let me jump in for a second.
Okay.
This committee, the local comprehensive committee, being from the planning board, we like to vision things. We like to look down the road. What we're trying to get town government to do is to not be reactionary and regulatory for everything. We want to be more proactive. So we want to look at things and see where can we head off some future problems. And that's what most of the action items are addressing, so that we're not always in the position where something goes wrong and we just have to do a quick fix, that we actually have a plan in place. So if a bridge abutment gets washed out, we know exactly what we're going to do and how we're going to treat it. We want to have a plan for the wetlands that we have. We're sewering places now. In our discussions with the conservation members that came to our meetings, we talked about salt ponds and estuaries and things like that, and how they best absorb storm impacts and things like that. We talked about jetties and armament and things like that. What do we do in the future about those situations? What can we do to implement some of the best designs for coastal resiliency? So that's what we're looking for, is more of a proactive approach to how we can protect the town and its resources.
This came up, Betsy, I remember the conversation we were talking about, and our concern was how the town's gonna bounce back from the next hurricane, where, how we're gonna bring back, we were talking about protecting our bridges, our roads on the beach, our beaches, and the idea, I think you actually brought it forward, that having these wooded wetlands that allows the storm surge to go up and come back slowly is actually gonna help save not just the wooded wetlands, but the beaches on the waterfront too. And that was really the nuance for me, that I got the idea, maybe we should do more of this, because our concern was our vital infrastructure on the beach, especially Trunk River, an area where we have not only the bike path, the sewer line, and the Falmouth Road race, and the idea that from our land use looks of the town, that what makes Falmouth different than most other towns is when you come into our town, you start driving down Central Ave and you have a long beach road that you get to see the waterfront over the whole town. We're the only town on Cape Cod that has that. All the other towns that's all private property. You can't drive those beaches, you can't see it. And we, in our discussion, thought that's kind of what Falmouth is. People used to say, isn't Falmouth nice? Well, Falmouth's special because that's one of the components we have. And so, not only preserving wetlands for saving wetlands, the idea was that we learned from you and from doing other research that it might help us save our waterfront as well in a massive storm. So that's how our idea of putting a goal to go out and start working on wetlands restoration. And we just wanted to talk it over with your board, see what you thought about it and what your actions were on it, and so we were all on the same page, that's all.
We've gone to school on Hurricane Sandy and other major events, so.
Yeah, so I can expand a little bit
Yeah.
on what you were saying. And the additional aspect, in addition to sort of the physical role that wooded wetlands play, which you just brought up, which is true, is also healthy wetlands have a lot of other ecosystem services. For instance, will remove nitrogen from groundwater much more effectively than just letting it pass through. And so in the past, I don't know, Jen, 5 years maybe, there's a series of areas, and I was just jotting them down when I realized you wanted me to talk already. But all of you are aware that we're working on the Coonamessett River restoration. And one of the advantages of that, in addition to many others, improving fish habitat and so forth, is removing that dam, which allows floodwaters to go up, but also restoring the wetlands so that if there is a flood, healthy, kind of normal freshwater wetlands will bounce back much more quickly than altered wetlands or pavement, obviously. But in addition, just to let you people in town know, in addition to the Coonamessett, there's a work underway to restore a fish run on the Childs River. That's Falmouth Fish and Rod and Gun Club. Department of Marine and Environmental Services are working out in McCoy, another river from McCoy Bay. Cedar Lake was restored a couple of years ago, the Cedar Lake Herring Run in North Falmouth. We have worked with, at various times, trying to either put grants together or contact not-for-profits who might be interested in restoring areas like the pond at Woodneck. Woodneck Marsh is on one side, but there's a pond on the other side, which used to be attached to the marsh. New Silver Beach, the big area in New Silver Beach that has been kind of cut off from the sea. There's still a pipe that runs through, but as far as a functional wetland, in terms of providing all its ecosystem services, it has a long way to go, but we should think about restoring it. And then one that we talked with the planning department about is the area upriver from Little Pond,
Behind the mall.
behind the mall.
Oh, yeah.
So there's,
Bring that up.
so there's a series that we're working on, and I would encourage us to continue a dialogue to see what other areas we might add to this, and how, once you sort of get into the restoration mode, you get contacts at the state and the federal level, and we'd be happy to share those with people.
And I know when we had a meeting, Jim, Brian, myself, and Jen, we kind of discussed pre-planning the aftermath, if we lost.
Right, that was the next step, yeah.
So,
Good point.
Jen also mentioned that FEMA says, well, we'll fund what was there,
Right.
so how do you, I guess my question is, how do we pre-plan all this? Do we ask engineering to take a look at it, come up with a plan so that when,
So the people that weren't there, we were talking about a problem when we met with DPW. They said, there's a problem. Every time we have a hurricane, we're only allowed to put back the bridge exactly the way it was. And they know a much better way to make it more resilient, but they can't do it that way. They have to put exactly what was there, so it's almost building to fail again. And so our idea was to come up with a concept where we could either get it approved in advance, or I think Jen said, well, you just gotta rebuild it now the right way, before it gets knocked down, but, actually make it more resilient. In particular, the discussion came, our concerns were the choke points at Trunk River, again, and at Mara Vista Great Pond, Coonamessett entrance to the Coonamessett River. That bridge is really, I used to live in that area near Hurricane Bob, and boy, that thing's on the edge a lot. And when they took that bridge down to rebuild it, it changed our town big time if you lived on the other side of the bridge. My commute to downtown went from 5 minutes to 25 minutes. And that was a big impact, and it cut off the whole town. I mean, before that bridge was there, that was actually Mashpee. That wasn't even part of Falmouth. That was the town line. That's how big of that link is. And so our concern is that's kind of a preservation thing. We don't know how long we're gonna be able to keep it. We're all faced with sea level rise. But from our side, we wanna do everything we can as long as we can. And so that's what we wanna talk to you folks about, to do some pre-planning.
So,
Jim, our thought when we were talking about this with, I think it was with Peter McConerty, is that if the DPW had plans in place so that it could be deemed shovel-ready, if something like Sandy happened, the government funded shovel-ready projects. So, to be done. I don't know the truth of that, that's what I understood. So that if engineering could create the plans to make a difference, that it wouldn't be wiped out in the next storm, and they just filed it until. I don't know the truth of it.
well, I think that having seen the effects of hurricanes firsthand, you can't always predict what's gonna happen. And, one area, it might be very similar, and you might have these plans that are, and Doug certainly knows how much effort goes into engineering plans. You might have plans, and I think I noticed Mike here, you might go and have these plans, and I can tell you from working on the Coonamessett and getting plans and getting permitting, there's a lot of effort and a lot of money that goes to it, and it might be that it's a completely different situation after the fact. But there could, what I'm
This is
wondering.
something they brought up, we don't know.
Well, no, but I think a lot of times I know we're a permitting agency, but sometimes permitting agencies tend to be very restrictive in their thinking. And I'm wondering, I don't know, Brian, you might be able to shed some light on this, but whether it's, is there any kind of, well, I think Sam, you went to a workshop, but is there any sort of forward thinking for some of these, I mean, these things would all require, Concom permits, 401 permits, 404 permits, et cetera. But is the federal government willing to be sort of proactive on this also? I mean, it's,
I don't know. I mean, we're trying to figure out how to bounce back better. This comes from our element about resiliency, not
Right.
conservation, which is how you bounce back. And this
Right.
is one of those ideas is planning, and so we need to have a joint plan, because it's in your area.
Right.
So we don't know the answer, we're here to
right, but
find
we're
it.
not the only, I mean, we're not the only town facing this. Coastal towns are facing this everywhere, and they would have the same permitting restrictions.
Were you gonna say? Okay, well, so, one idea that came to mind for me was the fact that at the Mara Vista Bridge, when they rebuilt that, there was the section closest to the Mara Vista Beach there in front of the hotel.
Right.
Where they used some plastic sheet piling, and in that area where they used that, even though the sand comes and goes, that's held up really well. And I was wondering if there might be some plan where we use that type of material along the roadway. Then, when the storm comes, it may wash things away, but maybe the roadway would remain or more intact, and that would help us to rebound. That's just one thought that I
Well,
had.
it's interesting you say that, because it's Surf Drive that was redone, I think it was after Sandy, right? Is all,
Bob.
anybody who runs and rides their, no, after Bob, but after Sandy, it was
Yeah,
all
it got
undercut,
messed up again.
and it was redone.
Right.
So that areas like that, it might be wise to identify areas like that at least,
Right, even if it's a small-scale project, like a demonstration project in our most vulnerable area where the, like the sewer line and the bike path all converge and the roadway is so exposed.
right,
And the
right.
Falmouth Road Race, we just think if we lose that, we're gonna change our town.
But yeah, I mean, it's more than just the road
Yeah,
there.
and so
Right.
it's a lot.
Mike, did you want to say something, Mike?
Yeah, looking around the room, I was on the equivalent of civil defense in Hurricane Bob, and I actually was out there after the storm. And I just wanted to share some things with you that the damage was strange in places. And it was actually hard to understand some of the things that happened, but on the roads and on the bike path that was near the ocean, it actually, the water lifted the pavement up and washed the sand out, and then the pavement would collapse and you'd have these great big lumps. And so I suggested at the time when they rebuilt them, they actually extend the hard surface down a little bit, maybe would stop that. The other thing that was very surprising was how in places the waves attacked certain areas, it didn't attack others. And behind the Chappaquiddick Grill, there's a brand-new box culvert. And what was remarkable there was, when you stand at that box culvert, you look, it's a long, long way across that salt marsh. But at that place, Hurricane Bob destroyed the railroad tracks. And those railroad rails were bent like spaghetti. And I'll tell you, that just shows you that the force of those waves were remarkable, but there was only one area that was damaged like that. So I think the thing you're gonna face is you're gonna have to rebuild your roads almost as quick as you can, because it's gonna be very hard to fix them. And I'm sorry I was late. I wanna make sure everybody goes by West Falmouth Harbor, because our tides are higher now. They're noticeably and measurably higher. If you live in West Falmouth, it is absolutely surprising.
Thanks, Mike. I'm sorry, Brian.
So,
Jeff.
just to take a couple of steps back from your previous discussion, I always tell the planning board and other boards is, don't worry about the current regulatory environment, especially at the federal level. Plan what you see best for the community in the best of all worlds. How would you go about doing it? 25 years ago, no one dreamt we'd have federal policies that require complete streets. sidewalks, bike lanes, chevrons, wayfinding, the whole bit. It was Federal Highway, Mass DPW at the time. It was all about maintenance and paving streets. So don't worry about what the feds say today, because it could change tomorrow. That's my guidance.
Okay.
Anything else?
Yeah. I don't know.
Go ahead, Betsy.
Well, I'm just thinking of other places, having been to Louisiana recently, although I wasn't right, I was by the bayous, not right by the coast. But there are lots of places that have, you know, coastlines that are only a foot or two above sea level, that have roads along them. And so one of the things I suggest is that we, I'm saying, this is the royal we, someone look to see if there are systems. I mean, they might not withstand all storms, and they, you know, if it's a particularly bad area that gets hit, it might not work. But I'll bet there are better ways to build roads on barrier beaches than what we have.
Well, some of the reading I've been doing is that there's a lot of places who have policies of raising the roadway, and I didn't want to bring it up on the first breath, but I would like to see us consider elevating that roadway as well as reinforcing it with the plastic sheeting, because I think if we had a long-range plan, we know sea level is rising as far as all we can tell, but we can also be raising the road, you know, incrementally, maybe 2 feet sometime when we finish the permitting, and maybe in another 20 years, another couple feet. Or if all of that turns out not to be possible, we should explore it as much as possible now and figure out if it's just not feasible, then we'll think of another option, and whether that would be moving the sewer line, abandoning the road, or maybe consider now putting in an elevated roadway if we feel the roadway is that important to our town for the scenic vista. But I just want to get started on the discussion of what is possible and what's allowable, and, you know, at least get going with something.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of options
A lot
out
of
there.
places do elevate, and
Right.
like, look at Holland, they've been dealing with this forever. They
Right.
have dikes around their whole country, and it's just what they do. I'm not saying we should dike everywhere and do the extreme that they've done, but, you know, it may be a good example to consider that a lot of these places are elevating their roadways if they feel they're important.
Might be like the road down the Keys.
Yes, no thought.
One of the things they learned after Katrina was the degradation of the islands offshore, the barrier islands. And essentially, we are the barrier island. And with Sandy, they found that the areas that had a good dune system survived. There was virtually hardly any damage to property that was set behind the dunes. And I come from a town that had breakwater put out offshore. I mean, a good quarter of a mile offshore. And that has saved the town innumerable times over the years, from nor'easters and no-name storm, you name it, all the hurricanes that we've had. So I look at things that, like the living reef system, where you're putting a buffer that's out away from the shore, away from your actual shoreline, your beaches, so that it acts as a buffer to kind of soften the impact and take some of the energy away, rather than having all that energy hit what you're trying to protect. So rather than have the armor right up where the infrastructure is that you're trying to protect, or the property you're trying to protect, if you have it offshore, it acts, what they would act as is like the coastal ponds. You know, water would be broken up, the energy would be absorbed a little bit better. And I see that as one way of protecting areas vulnerable like Surf Drive and Minot.
Even something like that could even be used within the coastal ponds.
Mhm.
A lot of our coastal pond shoreline is being eroded. And we actually, that was an idea that came up when we were talking about Graham, that we were talking about the Coonamessett, but then we were saying, well, let's do the whole Coonamessett Great Pond system, and maybe we ought to think about like oyster reefs off
Right.
within
Yeah.
Great Pond, you
And
know, in
it-
an area where, because there are multiple uses of those ponds.
Right,
but-
right. And in a living reef, where it actually will create a shallow area between the outside edge of the reef and the beach.
Right.
It creates a nice area for all kinds of life to propagate. And, you know, I'm constantly amazed at how resilient ocean life is, and all you have to do is let your mooring line hang in the water for a week or two, and you see what grows on it. To pump sand up and create a reef like that, I could see huge benefits for the marine environment as a result of that. So I think it's something that I would really seriously like this town to consider.
You have something, Courtney?
Actually, a lot of the thoughts I have are been sort of covered in one way or another by some of the people who've spoken ahead of time. And I think it's both short-term and long-term, and part of it has to be an assessment. Someone spoke earlier about the fact that we have a shore road that runs pretty much all the way from Central Avenue all the way into Woods Hole, and that's kind of an asset in this town that's enormous. The question becomes, if sea level rise occurs as predicted, can a roadway like that, or those roads, be viable in the long term? In the short term, certainly repairs and sheet armor, sheet piles, and all that stuff, all these things, elevating highway, those are short term. And I think one of the things that the town has to look at is whether or not there are alternatives to some of these coastal roads, maybe that we have to start looking at. The other part of this is we consider planning, and I think all of you are astute enough to understand this point, and that is people, it just seems to be human nature not to want to spend money. And it's a political problem. It's a lot easier for a politician to get elected by saying we're going to cut spending and not raise taxes. And when we say that, everybody gets excited and that person gets elected. But the problem is that what we're doing is we're shortchanging the things that are vitally important to our existence, not here only in Falmouth, but throughout the country. And we have infrastructure that's decaying, bridges falling down, roads that are bad, mass transit that's, becoming third world and so forth. It's because we're not investing the capital in it on an ongoing way. And why? Because it's a lot easier to say we don't want to spend the money, because in short term, that's more attractive to the voter. And so I would hope that as we begin to look at solutions to this, that we also look at ways to fund it, because that becomes the tough part of it. You can sell it to this group, everybody thinks it's terrific, take it into town meeting and you tell them you're gonna raise the taxes or have to float a bond issue or an override, and all of a sudden the scope of it changes.
I would suggest that it's not even just the money, but the reaction, particularly in this town, to change. And
Oh, yeah.
particularly, you're gonna change, the things I love most about this town. I think that's a big hurdle.
What's the change though, Mary? I mean, Doug
Well,
had the idea of raising the roadway a little bit. I mean, incrementally, is that what you were talking about, Doug?
I mean,
But there's a
It
finite,
depends,
there's
you know.
a, there's a time that that's not gonna work. And I think Courtney's saying, yeah, there are short-term things we can do, but we really have to be thinking, we really have to be thinking of short-term and long-term. If we get hit by a storm in September, then how are we gonna deal with it? What do we wanna be, what you're talking about is more, what do we wanna be thinking 20, 30 years down the line? Are there potential ways to
And even further.
mitigate
Yeah.
the problem? And how would we plan for this? How would we plan for it from an engineering point of view? How would we plan for it from a financial point of view? So both those planning questions have to come.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all well and good to elevate surf drive a couple of feet, but if we have to issue fins to everybody that wants to go to Woods Hole because it's under 4 feet of water, and we're looking at the end of the century, then we haven't really addressed the issue. I mean, there's gonna be some real tough choices, and I was looking I was reading this coastal resiliency statement, and it's a great thing, and we're talking about, all of a sudden, saying that we can't have any more development in flood zones and in certain areas. and this becomes a regulatory thing for conservation, it becomes a planning issue, it becomes all of that. And that's a tough political, that's gonna be a tough political sell, because, we already find that on conservation, that sometimes when we're balancing property rights with regulatory stuff, that, it's a very hard thing, and, it's not an easy job, and it's not an easy balance. And the more of that sort of stuff you do, the harder the political choices.
Well, Paul, you go ahead.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a comment. Bob's comment about protecting the roadway, I think is an important one. I'd like to see us consider beach nourishment. I know there are issues with it, but if we had a beach nourishment program every year continuously, like you do in other states, we could protect that area as well. And we may not have such a big investment on raising roads and things like that, which is something we need to consider. But a beach nourishment program with the sand offshore would be something that I think would be very helpful for some of those areas. The second part of it is, my understanding is the beach committee provides $800,000-900,000 a year to the coffer of the town. We should be able to allocate some of that money toward the beach nourishment program that you're worried about.
So, I just wanted to say, I don't want to, try not to, be unrealistic, but I don't think we should focus on really what the costs are. We should focus more on whether or not it's a good idea for us for now. And if we can come up with a plan, then we should. And another issue that we haven't talked about yet as far as related to beach nourishment, we've got these jetties that have been sitting there swirling the sand out to the middle of the bay for a long time. I'd like to see us come up with a plan to remove those and, let the sand just move along the shore instead of getting sucked out into the bay. We're losing a lot of sand every year to that. We've had these studies from the Woods Hole Group for 2003, and they updated in 2010. We've got a lot of good information, so we should really take some action. And I don't know what would be involved in approving removal of those jetties, but it seems like a really small step that we could take. I mean, a big step for a small investment. So I would start with that and then consider whether or not we can protect our most critical areas like Surf Drive. And if the sheet pile idea and elevating the roadway is practical, then we could just get a plan together and say, maybe the Conservation Commission would approve this type of work, and the DPW could then start considering it, and then we could figure out what the cost is. If it's not doable, of course, we won't do it, but I don't think it's our job to worry about the cost as much as, not trying to come up with a crazy idea that's gonna be super expensive, like a
Bridge to nowhere.
Disneyland Sky Rail or, something wacky. But,
I think, I think it's tempting to talk about things like beach nourishment and removing jetties, but you have to realize that a natural system, and really Mother Nature's in charge of it all, comes up with a balance. And so now our coastline has a certain balance when there are various storms, and it's not quite predictable. I mean, you'd have to really think about what might happen if you start plucking up certain jetties, or if you put a lot of sand on beaches, where that sand's gonna go. I mean, one of the places sand goes is it moves into inlets, and this is what happened through the years, and you can see it at Woodneck Beach.
right, and I understand.
People are worried about it happening in West Falmouth.
And you would have to keep jetties at the inlets, I understand that, but I mean, there's so many that don't seem to really
Right,
have a purpose other than to
to
throw
catch
sand out.
catch the sand in the downrift
Right.
side.
Jamie, do you have something?
The discussion kind of started with pre-planning, pre-permitting. Is that a viable alternative, that if the vulnerable areas are identified, maybe in degree of, importance, for lack of a better word, is it possible to have some of this pre-permitted in that, in the eventuality something happens? So it's, a lot of people aren't gonna buy into spending the money to do some of this stuff ahead of time. So if some of this stuff could be heavily pre-planned, pre-permitted, that if that bridge is taken out, do we already have something in place with the new design?
My only answer to that would be is I guess we'd have to try it and see what happens, you know? Nobody seems to know.
I mean, they'll,
So,
preliminary
unless
stuff
we
has to be
try it.
done So that in the eventuality, I mean, it would have to go through DEP or wherever to get a final approval, but
Inlets change.
Right.
That's the system we
Permits
have is
expire.
very dynamic.
we could
And
extend
depending
it
on the
over.
storm, depending on where it hits, you know, sand flows, it's very fluid.
50 years of my memory from Monarch Beach to Woods Hole is the same road. I've been doing, the same bridges. I know they've been knocked out, but it's,
Well, it's the same road, but I mean, you've lived there 50 years. I have friends who've lived there for 50 years and say when, when my kids, who are now 50, when my kids were little, we used to walk,
Yeah.
X amount of distance out to where the water was.
Yeah.
Right.
And now the
Right.
water's here.
I can remember that.
So,
right, I know, I guess our vision was, we were talking more on infrastructure. This resiliency item wasn't really so much, the beaches are part of it, but we were really focusing on the town's infrastructure. So we identified the road, the sewer line, the bridges and the connections as how do we make them more resilient? And that's where this element really came from. We understand the shoreline's changing, but how can we preserve what we have for as long as we can, is the idea. I think you agree we should do something, or you say we just sit back and wait. That's what we want to
No,
find out.
no.
What's your idea?
I mean, what you said, Jennifer said, I agree. People could look at those, we could have an evaluation now of those key bridges and say, is there something we could do now that if a storm hit, they would be less likely, one of them might go if it might be the worst part where the storm hits, but the others would be able to absorb it. So that's something, I think we could do now.
That's what we're here for.
Pat, did you have something?
Yeah. Our little committee of three became, and this is the second bullet, sort of, I think. We became sort of enamored with the living reef concept. As Bob said, he grew up in a town, Winthrop, that they essentially had something like a living reef, and now they've got so much sand inside that area, they have to figure out what to do with it. Well, if we had such a problem, we've been here 45 years, and yes, the beach has shrunk along Surf Drive to the point where there's probably not going to be very much left of it in a few years. But we also have, and here we get into the webbiness of this whole comprehensive plan. We have a bicycle path, infrastructure. We have the sewer line under there, infrastructure. And it's incredibly vulnerable, as you know. We've had some pops there. If we started the concept of the living reef and started it along the bicycle path, it would be some serious engineering. I can't speak to that. Started it along where the bicycle path is, where the sewer line is underneath of it, to see how that would work. Would it build the sand back in to serve as protection along there? So it's nothing that would have to be done, everything all at once, and this is what we're talking about. Let's see what we can do here. And I don't know whether there would be funding. Would be a project to look at as sort of an experimental to protect that whole beach line there along Surf Drive eventually. All we have to do is point to that little kiddie pool on Surf Drive Beach. It just doesn't change. It's there. It's been that way forever since I've been in town. That's the same kind of concept as a living reef. You would protect the shoreline that way. Now, that came out of this rebuild by design, which happened after Hurricane Sandy. Wiped out New York City, a good deal of it. And there was a contest for engineering firms to come up with potential engineering designs as to how New York City and the New Jersey coastline could be hardened against a storm like that. The living reef was one of those concepts.
I'm a biologist. Can you
Yeah.
define what you
Yeah.
mean by living reef?
Well, that's the title they put on it.
Right.
It's a program in, I think it's in Fishkill, Staten Island, and it was funded. They actually, Bob described it a little bit. There's actually a website you can see on it. It's basically a break off the shore that eats up the waves, and then every time they they dredge, they keep putting the sand back on the inside, and the break kills some of the energy of the waves and stops.
It'd be
protects some of the
basically
We're not talking about life.
No,
When I
but-
talk
Well,
about, I'm a
no,
coral reef
yeah.
biologist.
No, but
When I
yes.
talk about a living reef,
Well, it has oysters in
redundant.
it.
it's redundant.
Should I pass this on?
I don't know.
It's just some stuff from that.
Please,
It
one
has
at a
oysters.
Yeah, you're essentially,
hang on, one at a time, because it's tough for recording secretary, please, so.
They're also known as wave attenuating
Yeah.
devices. I think
Wave
that's,
attenuating
yeah, they're
devices.
concrete structures that are placed offshore. I can get both words.
Well, I-
Anything but living
I know we're getting
But I've seen,
it's called,
I've
that's
seen,
what they call it.
again, there's, I know we'd like to think of quick and easy solutions to things, but I've seen a number of coastal geology talks where those kinds of barriers have been put out there, and they, you know, so it's out in front of this part of the beach, and it really changes what happens to either side. So, yeah, I'm not saying that this isn't an idea we should explore, but I'm just saying it's not quite as simple a fix as it
Well, we
sounds.
understand that, yeah.
It's just a dream for us until we, get some
an
experts to tell
idea.
us if it's practical or not.
Yeah, that's an idea. So
Instead
put
of
it on
doing
the
nothing,
table.
we're
Well, we-
studying at least.
Yeah,
Well, and
Exactly.
the next bullet point down is to do an independent environmental risk analysis and to have recommendations come out of that, so that you find out from that risk analysis where the most vulnerable points are and what the firm that would do it would suggest as potentials. Now, do they have all the answers? Probably not. Can they understand what the heavens are gonna do? Probably not entirely, but, if you get some experts in there to work with the town, we can only imagine. We don't have that expertise right here, so we can only imagine and come up with this list of, gee, we should, to move ahead. So those three, again, are kind of interrelated, but we've also discussed, as you just heard from what I was saying and what Bob and Jim were saying, the whole infrastructure problem. And that is, then you run into the question, okay, if we get a massive storm, well, it wiped out all of those, well, almost half at least of those shacks along Surf Drive Beach. And I remember reading in the Enterprise, if they were wiped out, they could never be rebuilt. There they are. So we'd have to have a policy in the town. What would we rebuild? What wouldn't we rebuild? If, I'm throwing out questions that come into this whole question of your purview here too. If some of the lower lying areas, very small lots that are now being McMansionized, were wiped out, and the Falmouth infrastructure was wiped out, let's say some of this new sewer line that we're putting in is wiped out, the water lines wiped out, what responsibility does the town have to rebuild all of that infrastructure to service houses that no longer exist? And far-fetched, yes, but Katrina was far-fetched. That was massive.
It's not so far.
No, it's not. I'm just using that word, and I know perfectly well it is not. A Cat 5 hurricane is incredibly destructive. Are we gonna get a Cat 5 up here? I don't know, the water's getting warmer out there.
Probably not, but a Cat 2 could do a lot of damage.
It
Oh, yeah.
certainly
Well,
could.
Sandy was not even a hurricane.
Right.
So, it was if I could, that kind of brings up one of the other action items where we talk about bylaw and code revisions, because we hear a lot of times how you get into these regulatory situations, and I just saw a thing about people on Staten Island in New York. How many years after Sandy, these people still are not in their homes. And even something as simple as a building code told them, this one family, they had to repair their first floor and before they could raise the building up. So, in order to raise the building up, they had to rip out everything they had just done. And that was the building code requirement for that area. So there are things like that. And then what bylaws should we look at that restrict us from restoring something, or maybe we've talked about TDRs, for example, property that is in floodplains or velocity zones. If that gets wiped out, or someone wants to get out of there, do we transfer development rights from a property owner there to get that property out of an area where the town might be responsible for providing the infrastructure if it gets wiped out? So these are just some things that we've talked about, I'd like to throw out for this discussion. I mean, that's kind of futuristic stuff when we're talking bylaws and codes and things like that, but that's what this document is about.
Good.
Anyone from the public want to comment on what we've been discussing? Brian, anything else, Brian?
Just so the boards also know, the town has contracted with Woods Hole Group to finish up the FEMA plan, the pre-disaster mitigation plan. And part of their contract looks at some of the potentials you see on the third bullet point, so risk analysis of the highest, of our more vulnerable, not town-wide, but they'll be looking at that a little bit. And so they'll probably be in contact with the Conservation Commission and staff, and planning board members as they go through that process. Hopefully we can finish it up here before it changes its rules again.
So that's being done. So I mean, then what, so,
To a limited, to a limited extent, Betsy. I think the third bullet point talks about an evaluation of the entire town. We're looking at really critical infrastructure on this mitigation plan. That then is fundable through those pre-disaster mitigation funds. There's only $50 million nationwide. Not a heck of a lot of money, as you know. But don't worry about the federal government. Things, Congress can fund it, after the next Category 5 hurricane in the Northeast,
Okay. I'm curious, I don't know how the planning board feels, and I'm not sure what my board's gonna feel, but should we create a subcommittee to look at this a little bit more in depth and maybe report back to the whole group again?
Sure. That works for us. I mean, we do a lot of work in the subcommittee. That's what this came out of.
Come up with more ideas, Betsy. I think it's a good idea. I really do. Think into the future. So I think it's a good idea.
well, I think it's a good idea. I just want to know what the charge of this subcommittee
That's what
will
we're
be.
working on right now, hopefully.
Our little subcommittee, we find, can be fairly freewheeling. One thing brings out another thing, brings out another thing, and that's what I would expect a subcommittee to be. But the true value that I see in the subcommittee is, as Brian said, he doesn't ever remember in all the years he's been here, a joint meeting like this.
I think he just stayed home the night we had that.
That may be.
I remember having a meeting
That may be. But what it would do then is to keep this conversation going
That's
between
what I
the
was
two
thinking.
boards.
I think that's a good idea.
And to assure people, this subcommittee, the way ours work, we have no authority. We come up with the ideas, we bring it to our entire board. The entire board says yay or nay, and then we take it to the selectmen, and they say yay or nay. So it really is just a think tank type thing. We don't really go too far without going to the entire board. So we only do things to bring it forward to the planning board. So if we did something like this, this group would do it, they'd take it to both boards and see if it kept going. If it doesn't make sense, the board says, no, it's the end of the idea. You're not letting a small group run away with it, you're just having a few people focus on doing a plan.
Come up, keep people thinking.
To keep-
That's the whole thing, is
Well,
to keep this going.
it was a couple years ago that we met with you, but we thought that was a really productive meeting that day.
Yeah, oh, with,
Yeah, Jen,
Yeah.
we came up with, there's one thing that came up at that meeting that amazed me. People, the beach committee was always complaining, the conservation won't let us clean the seaweed on the beach, and we had a conversation with you, so as long as 10% of the beach is kept natural, you're okay with them cleaning the beaches. That wasn't even something anybody knew, and in fact, they probably still don't know that now, because it doesn't get communicated, so this kind of
well, somebody
communication.
said it I went to, when the beach plan was produced, however long ago it was, I was at that meeting, and what people always say is, well, we just want to clean the beaches for the summer. And I'm like, well, you know what? I said, that's when the birds feed on the beaches too. I said, and then somebody said, hey, you know what they do in Florida? They have 10%, they leave 10% of.
That's a
of the
brilliant
crap.
idea.
It is, that's what I thought.
And it could work everywhere. You know, I mean, there's more, that's a great idea. We should make sure our beach committee knows about that. We should make sure it's in their beach plan. And I think if we met more frequently, ideas like that would get disseminated better, because that came from a small meeting
Work with us, the
four of
people,
us,
yeah,
six
yeah.
of us talking about it. So that's the example that we're talking about, that maybe a subcommittee and see what these things come up with. In our meeting, it is a little bit blue sky, but we don't limit it, but the main committee puts us back on track right away. If it doesn't work, it doesn't go anywhere. But if you don't talk about it, it doesn't happen.
I think that it's important to keep the conversation going, I really do, on all, and I think this pretty lays it out pretty good, so.
Mr. Chairman, it's something that, the Concom can discuss and, create a subcommittee that can communicate with the planning board. So
You know, how about if we had so many members from the planning board and so many members of the conservation commission, and they met, you know?
And then they each report back to their own board.
I join.
Thank
Let's-
you, Mike, I really
Let's
appreciate
both put it on our next agendas,
Yeah.
or with that it fits, and go to our boards and see what they
Yeah,
think and
Can we
talk
vote
about
on
it
it
separately.
tonight?
yeah.
We can if you want, but
Why not?
Brian,
Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can vote on it tonight. This is, we're here, these are official meetings of both
We
groups.
have a quorum.
All it takes is a motion.
I
So-
move that we have a joint subcommittee with the planning board.
I second.
We have a motion and a second for a joint committee
And
with a.
no, I don't know what our quorum is for, so no more than 3 members on each. We couldn't have more than 3 members meet,
No, we couldn't, but
No, same
I
as us.
think
yeah.
even if it's
The-
just two, just as long as
this
we
is
have-
discussion of the motion before we voted the motion, but I think you're.
Right, we're refining what my
Right.
motion
You're
is.
right on target, Betsy, because the reason that we have a committee of 3 is, first of all, we can't have a quorum. But secondly, to really get things done, you don't want to have a board of 7 or 5, or you want to get a smaller core group. And then you bring it to the larger board to really get the fillings coming in on it, and the back and
So
forth.
my motion is that we have a joint, we have a subcommittee of each group that's a joint subcommittee with no more than 3 members from each board. And then we can think about who might want to be on that subcommittee as we go forward. That's my motion.
So we have a motion and a second, second?
Sure.
Okay. Hi, Paul.
Can we define what that subcommittee is supposed to do before we approve a motion like that?
Well, I
I
think
mean,
it's
just to
there.
have a committee
I
without
think-
some definition of what they're, if it's gonna
Pretty
be
much
all
what we've
coastal
been doing
resiliency,
here.
that should be in a motion.
I think pretty much what we've been doing here, and
To
again.
focus on action items in the comprehensive plan.
But you also can think outside the box too, because
Absolutely.
something might come up, you know, that we, you know,
Yeah. Yep.
like,
I think that one of the first goals of that subcommittee would be to develop a mission statement and put it forward for the committee before we go too far down any road.
That's fine, I think there needs to be
Yeah.
some definition of what that subcommittee is.
We have definition and a definition and a mission statement. And we'll put that subcommittee can bring it back.
Number 1 agenda, yeah.
And when that's on place, we may all disappear. You know, we can try.
anything else before we, I mean, you're gonna have to have your own separate vote,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So, as far as the Conservation Commission's going, anything else, Beth?
Nothing else. I said I
Kristen?
wasn't going to speak tonight, I have a sore throat.
I know you're speaking all week, haven't you? Hi, Kristen.
I'm not sure if I have a lot to add. I would like to see the wetland areas being moved further upland, because what we're talking about here is just infrastructure, but as we know, the land is gonna be going away, and we need to think about what's gonna happen there, and the wetlands are, you know, a great carbon resource and, great, you know, as we move, as the tides move in, we're gonna lose them, and
I think we're thinking all the way up all the rivers, a mile or 2
Right.
miles. We're not limited to the scope on the beach. I think we've already
Exactly.
discussed, and we're
It's
going all the
wide
way in.
open.
Yeah,
Because the idea that we learned is that's what's gonna protect the beaches also, maybe not forever, but lengthen their life, that act as a shock absorber by having, instead of filling in those areas and building on them, let them work, let them do their job, is the thought process, and that's way inland. So I don't think, Kristen, we're limiting in the view, at least not what we've been talking about. We're thinking is all the way into, T-ticket.
T-ticket school.
Yeah, that's one of the
That's right.
wetlands. I'm
Coonamessett
talking
River,
about.
all the way up
Yeah.
into East Falmouth. We're looking way in.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or loosely defined as the flood zone.
Well, it is the flood zone.
Absolutely.
I mean, it is the flood zone now,
varies.
so it's action items to
Areas
increase
such as storm
resilience
surge.
that are currently mapped. I mean, who knows what'll happen 50 years from now, but currently mapped as part of the flood zone.
Yeah.
Okay, Sam.
We'd just like to suggest that part of the scope of this group.
Sam.
You need to sit closer, Sam.
We told him, we invited him to,
I'm usually right in front of
Yeah.
One of the things I would
You have to tell us who you
suggest,
are.
oh, yes, Sam Patterson, Selectman resident, suggested you take a look at the bridges on Route 28 through East Falmouth, because from a hazard mitigation, if those bridges go out, Jim's talking about the detour he has to take when the Montauk Bridge goes out, or the Little Pond, one of those bridges where the inlets are. But if we take out the Route 28 bridges and any of those other bridges are taken out because we might easily get them, we need to be trying to think about preparing for that situation. And that, of course, is a state highway. So I have been pinging on Julian and Peter McConerty to get on the state's case to start thinking about actually raising those bridge structures up so that they are more resilient over a long period of time. But, I mean, I think that kind of idea coming out of this committee would give it some more weight too, and maybe motivate some people to start pushing on the authorities that actually have some control over the Route 28 highway. Just thought.
Thanks, Sam.
Just volunteered to be this.
The liaison to the committee.
yes.
Okay, so conservation, we have a motion and a second on the table to create this subcommittee of 3. All those in favor?
Up to 3.
No,
Up
Jeff,
to
no
3,
more than
I'm sorry, up to 3. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Abstentions, unanimous, so moved. Okay.
Okay, same vote for the planning board.
I move that the planning board vote to create a subcommittee, such as we just voted on with the Conservation Commission, membership no more than 3, to work with the Conservation Commission to further the wetlands and resiliency.
I'll second.
Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None, unanimous.
Leary.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
is it appropriate to assign individuals to that committee at this time, now that we've set up the committee?
I don't see why.
We have a committee set up on the planning board that I would make a motion we continue with that group, because they're very involved with this, but I think maybe,
We got 40 meetings a week, a month, a year we already have on the local comprehensive plan. We would like to share the load, Paul, maybe get some other people involved in it. Let's wait on that one.
well, we can only have 3 people.
Yeah.
I know, but
Right.
let's not assign it right now. Doesn't mean have to say
Well,
we
if
can
you
do
assign
it.
people, you
Well,
gotta
we
wait
still
a long
have,
time
we
to
still
get
have a
the
planning
committee
board
going.
member to join us, so.
Yeah.
Yes, Brian. Sorry about that.
So the planning board knows on your next agenda, you'll have committee assignments and reassignments.
Yeah.
Good, let's do it then.
But they have to do it too.
Yeah, you know,
We will, we'll take care of our.
They can
Probably
figure it
not.
out, Paul, they can
we
figure it out.
probably will not do it next week, because we're jammed next
Yeah,
week. I mean,
won't
it's,
be
the
there.
agenda is brutal. So maybe it'd be
No,
the
but-
following week.
See?
First meeting in June, July.
If you don't sign good.
Well,
Our agenda next week is awful.
Oh, I think I'm sick next week.
But if you want to meet some, or not meet, I shouldn't say that. We'd have to figure out how often they were going to meet. I mean, some of us have other,
we can
you know.
take this up separately. I think we've done a really good job so far. I think we just work on it individually and then come back together again.
Okay, that sounds
What we
good.
found with the LCP is that we decided our own meeting schedule according to the availability, the time, and the numbers of meetings, and would probably work.
Great, awesome.
So we'll choose our team next week, and then the chairmans will talk and get together.
Sounds good. So,
Good. So, Betsy, did you want to talk on the number 3 on the agenda?
I already did.
yeah, I think we covered it, yeah.
I already did, that there's much more than just resilience.
Right.
Resilience for infrastructure is one thing. Wetland resilience has a physical role, which you already talked about, but there's all these ecosystem services, and you talked about carbon sinks, it's also a nitrogen sink. You know, there are a lot of things that healthy wetlands can do, and healthy wetlands are much more likely to come back quickly and be functioning the way we want them to function if they're have been restored. And we have a lot of wetlands in town that need help, and we're in the process
And
of
you're working on it, yeah, you've got.
We're working on some of them.
We've
We've,
Yeah.
identified the areas.
we've identified them, and we're working on some, but it's a long process.
One of the things we're gonna do on the local comprehensive plan is that our committee, that group plans to go to the different boards and say, okay, these action items have been in place for a couple of years, what you've done, and so we would ask you to report on, we collect all that information. It sounds like you have a full report ready to go on the things you've been working on for 2 years. So that's great. See, we kinda learned that tonight. So that was good for us to hear.
There are some other boards that don't know it either, that I've learned,
Right.
and I've tried to educate them.
I mean, I'm familiar with the Coonamessett River because I've been involved in that for a long time, but I learned a lot about the other ones that I didn't even know about. Even Little Pond, wasn't aware that you're working on that one, going up
Yeah.
behind, that'd be great.
Yeah, it's exciting. I
Yeah, I
think this is
think
an
it is.
exciting time for people who care about,
And,
natural areas in town.
and the public will learn about it too, and it'd be a good idea, so, all right. Bob, do you want to go any further on, you're the one.
No, I was just, Betsy mentioned that you've been writing grants and you've had different, I'm glad to hear that because my board has listened to me rave about how we live in a scientifically rich community, and this is a perfect laboratory for the sciences and in wetlands restoration and coastal resiliency. And I'm just wondering if that can't be pushed some more, who we could get to push more for that? Do you want more push for that?
Well, we do, and I can't talk about it tonight, but soon I hope I can talk to you, and I'd be happy to go to your meeting and give a little update as to where we are. But
Great.
I think we have an opportunity in this, I will say this, we have an opportunity in this town to, not only do restoration, which we're in the process of doing, but really accurately determine how much of a role it plays in some of these ecosystem services. And I think it's important as far as other initiatives that are going on in town.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I mean, I'm a scientist, so,
Yeah.
I
mean,
think
Falmouth
it's
should be
exciting.
leading in this.
Falmouth should be leading, yeah,
It should be.
yeah.
I'm good.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Everybody's good? How about the public? Any comments, Sam? You want anything else from anybody? Mike, you good?
Gee, Michael, missed you at our meeting.
Gave him a chance to talk about it a little.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we should do this again, really. I mean, the subcommittee meets up, and then maybe sometime next fall, or, when it slows down a little bit, we could do another one of these joint meetings. I thought that was very good, very informative.
Enjoyed it.
Kind of
and
know
if
where
I'm
you
in
guys
like it-
are, and, kind of see where
Are we
we
wrapping
are.
up?
Yeah.
What, wait a second.
No, we were missing
What
something.
about this
The Conservancy.
The
Well, yeah,
Conservancy.
Bob, I
overlay
I
regulation?
Oh, I thought you meant,
We're just wrapping up that other part.
yeah, I
I
thought.
thought that's what I gave it to you.
Oh, no, that was the handoff? No.
Yeah, that was the handoff.
Actually,
I don't call for an
No, Bob,
motion to adjourn yet?
I thought
Keep
Bob
going.
had something he wanted to do, and
Right.
I thought I waved to him, see if he wanted to go with it.
Well,
We
I
discussed
had-
it a little bit.
yeah, I had one
I thought
thing.
we
and-
just grazed
No
it.
motion to adjourn yet.
Oh, okay.
No, actually, the segue from going up behind the mall up to T-Ticket, that waterway there, we talk a lot about redevelopment in this town. Things are going to get redeveloped. Things are going to change. The days where you fill in a cranberry bog and put a mall on it, I hope are gone. And I've been to several conferences on sea level rise and coastal resiliency, and one of them I came across Falmouth Conservancy bylaw, which pretty much prevents you from building in a flood zone and velocity. Chatham, rather. What did I say?
So you said Falmouth.
Falmouth. Oh, I wish.
You're a little ahead of
I
yourself.
wish. Chatham's Conservancy bylaw. And I think this is, something like this could be an important tool as areas in town do get redeveloped. Do we want to be developing areas where we shouldn't be developing? And I've said at our meetings that I would think the first stop would be for the town to think in those terms, that the town should not be promoting development in these areas. And from there, it shouldn't be a stretch to go to the private sector as well. So in a case where the mall does get redeveloped, the stores and things get moved further up into the parking lot, and the wetlands in back become a restored wetland and maybe a green path through that section of town. So I think this is a tool that might aid in that when it comes to redeveloping in these areas. And I'd just like to know what other people think, and this kind of fits into the bylaw and code change action item that we have in this element. And I throw it out there. We've discussed it at our board. I've heard it discussed at several conferences I've been to and webinars and things like that. And I just thought I'd throw it out here.
Sure.
I won't say any more after this. So, for a few years, I was on, and I believe we still have, but I don't know how active they are, a coastal ponds committee that before you were on, Sam, that was established. And so I just want to throw out, would that be part of this? In other words, are you thinking, because that's a little bit different than zoning on land? I mean, we could do either, or we could combine it.
It's basically, it's zoning on land. I mean, it's going to prevent you from building in areas that are sensitive, close to wetlands and cedar swamps and things like that, more than the 100-yard buffer, or 100-foot buffer, or whatever buffers we have. Yeah, it would affect what gets built on land.
So any of this zoning is, now we're back in the planning world.
Back in planning world, Mr. Chairman, the Chatham Conservancy bylaw, up until April of this year, only affected land underwater.
So
they have recently moved forward to incorporate certain flood hazards in it. That's very, very recent. Other states have looked at these types of conservancy districts also. And it's really, very focused in scope. But more states and other jurisdictions are looking at this type of conservancy district.
So it started with land underwater, and now it's extending
Yeah.
to
Right.
land that might be flooded.
Land that might be subject to 3-foot waves.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And there's a high hazard districts, I think.
Huh.
I think Chatham incorporated some of the new FEMA zones. I don't know which ones, and we'll see how that works out. But it's a regulatory tool that combines a lot of Conservation Commission issues under a sort of a zoning umbrella. In other states, I know the Senate just passed a comprehensive zoning reform bill. It's going to go to a House Conference Committee. We'll see what happens with all some of the vested rights issues. A lot of other states are far more strict about vested rights issues. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts, as you know, zoning tools are very archaic. The last comprehensive review was in 1975. I was in high school. So we'll see what happens with that tool, but it's a growing tool nationwide.
So, I lied. I'm gonna say something more.
Imagine that.
So Rob,
Let the record show I've done best. I'm kidding.
yeah, you're not as bad as what he said to me. So Rob, if, I think this is a good idea, but it's a little bit different from the subcommittees that we just established. Is this, so I'm gonna throw it back to the planning board.
Yeah,
Is
this
this
would-
something the planning board is gonna have a subcommittee to sort of investigate?
I don't know if it reach a subcommittee level. Most
You're gonna do it as a-
most bylaws, we will have an open discussion at our meetings.
Okay.
We will have drafts, innumerable drafts sometimes. We discuss them, tweak them, and then we put them out to different committees that might have some input
Well, that's
to
just
those.
what I was gonna say.
And we get
Our-
feedback from that. So it's a long process, and some of these bylaws take a year, 2 years to
Yeah, but
to-
that's
to
just what I was gonna
craft.
say.
Yeah.
So our role would come where you put something on paper.
Yeah, you get
and
to shoot
we
us
can look
down
and
or-
say, yeah, that's
Yeah.
much,
So,
love that role.
yeah.
It's so much easier.
It's so much easier,
We
yeah.
he's bringing it up, we haven't really gotten much on our board on it either. This
Yeah.
is just probably some really early thinking.
I'm just trying to be positive, saying that
Yeah.
I'm sure our board would be happy to look it over and make suggestions.
Right.
Constructive suggestions.
Sure.
If you look at the
No, not just shoot it down.
the very
I
beginning,
said that.
if you just read the purpose, it's perfect. I mean, it's exactly what the town needs. So, I mean, you don't necessarily have to use their permitted regulations, but their purpose statement is really on
Yeah.
track.
So
And it-
they're halfway there.
Yeah. And it's more the
Halfway, just
prohibited
change the name of the
uses
town.
that,
Yeah, he already did.
yeah. So, okay.
Great.
Russ, anything else?
Russ, we got it.
Oh,
Courtney?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think, this coastal conservancy area idea, districts, I think is extraordinarily relevant, because this really hits to the core of, looking down the road. I mean, you can address infrastructure, but you also have to address issues of development or redevelopment. And, you know, it's not only a local issue, it's also, you know, we have to look at bringing our state and our federal regulations into sync with it. A couple of things that came up here tonight, and one was that FEMA, you know, will give money to rebuild something exactly as it was. So it doesn't make whatever it is more resilient. So this is kind of self-defeating. We should be putting pressure on our legislators and so forth to modify that so that perhaps FEMA only pays for the cost of replacement, but gives the town the flexibility to redesign something to be more resilient, and will pay the replacement cost or allow it to be applied to the reconstruction, for example. The other thing is that, you know, there's a disincentive in our federal flood insurance program. Because if we want to control development, one of the ways to control development on the coastlines is to put an economic incentive or disincentive in there. And if you're essentially having the federal the taxpayer subsidize people that have houses along the shore, that's inherently, number one, unfair, and number two, it's counterproductive to what we're trying to do in the long term. And I think we should be in the forefront of advocating for some change in that. Now, I know that's not popular, particularly if you own a house that's in the floodplain, and you know, but, you know, in reality, why should the taxpayer in Idaho, for example, foot the bill for someone to live in a house along the shore? And particularly when it makes the cost of that economically possible for the resident to live there. We should, if we want to actively discourage that, we should create an economic disincentive, not incentive. Anyway, that's a rant for another day.
Yeah. I don't know if anybody saw the Frontline Business of Disaster about how FEMA operates and the insurance companies, and it actually, you know, you think of the insurance companies going bankrupt because of these big things, they actually make more money. They have a profit margin of about 30%.
It's the reinsurance business.
Yes, yeah.
That's the money.
And we're still paying for it. We're paying the insurance companies to distribute the money. So I thought the government was out of it completely, but it's not. So
No,
we're,
well,
we're,
we tried to get out
we're
of it,
still,
but I know
we're
it's-
still paying for it one way or the other. So,
Yeah, I'm just concerned that on one hand, you're trying to control something, and on the other hand, you're providing economic incentive to do what is not appropriate.
yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
Michael,
Yes.
can I make a motion to adjourn?
Yes, you
Second?
may. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
No. Abstention, or abstention.
Hey.
Thank you, everybody.